back to the shop once again. Today we're going to show you how to change your spark plugs on your second generation 3.5 liter and 3.7 liter V6 Duratec engine. Now this engine, this second generation, came out in 2011, so I don't have a video on the new updated procedure to remove the intake or the updated plugs. So we're going to go over that today and cover the 2011 through 2017 model years. Now for the early on, the first generation 3.5 liter V6, 2006 through 2010, I have a video on that. I'll link down below. The spark plug and the specs and the intake and stuff like that's different. So with this, the procedure on this 2011 Explorer will be very similar, if not identical, to your engine. So it'll be a good general guide. And of course, the spark plug part number, the spec for the torque, and of course the gap is all the same. So it's going to help a lot of you out there once it comes time to changing plugs on these. Now I recommend changing plugs every 60,000 miles because you'll find around 60,000 miles or so that the plug gap is just going to be huge. They're going to be worn out at that point. So if you're in there for any reason or you just want to do general maintenance, 60,000 seems to be the key mileage here. Now the very first step is actually to run the engine. If it's dead cold, it's been sitting overnight more than 4 hours, and it's at room temperature, Ford actually wants us to start these engines up, get them a little warm, okay, and then we can start the procedure. The reason being is these plugs have a tendency to pull out the threads when they come out, okay, so you don't want it too cold and you don't want it too hot. So we're just going to start it, let it run for, just a few minutes, 2-3 minutes, and it'll be good to go to start taking off the intake and getting these plugs out. Okay, now once the engine is ran for a couple minutes, go ahead and shut it down, take the key and get it away from the vehicle so there's no accidental starts. And then we can go ahead and start pulling off all these pieces to get to the spark plugs. Now the very first thing you want to do is pull this engine appearance cover off of here, and it takes a little finesse so you don't ruin it. There's a push fastener here, right next to the throttle body, over here, okay, and there's one right here in the front, the oil fill cap extension. So you pull that off to the side. And then the one over here has a retainer right in the middle. You pull up on that, and then you pull up on the whole thing, okay? And it looks a little something like this. Off to the side. Now this one right here technically is a push fastener, but if you try to pry it out of there, you're gonna break it, okay? So just take the time and unscrew it like a regular bolt, and it'll come out without damage, okay? Because otherwise it's just going to break and you're going to tear up your foam cover here and everything else. So we'll just be patient and unscrew it. There we go. And it comes out just like that. And then this whole cover will kind of come up and off of here and it'll get out of our way. Now as soon as that cover is off of there, go ahead and put your oil fill cap back on so we don't lose anything down on the engine. And then we can go ahead and start pulling off the air intake snorkel here and the intake manifold so we can get to the back spark plugs and do it all at once. So we're going to go ahead and pull off this fresh air inlet. You'll see it right here. It goes over to the valve cover, follow it up and over to your air intake snorkel, and just release the gray tang on there. The locking lever. Pull back on it, and then pull, and it'll come right out. And I'll take it off this side too, just to get it out of the way. Right here, by the air filter housing, is the mass airflow sensor. Pull back on the red connector, and then just push in on the black connector, the locking tang, and that'll come out. And there's two clips right here. The metal clips that hold the housings together. Just pop those off. And then right back here, there's a hose that goes into the resonators right here. Just pulls right off. Let it sit there and dangle, okay? Now, there's two worm drive clamps on here. They're 8mm. Just take off this one right here where it connects to the throttle body. So just unscrew it. Like so. Grab it, give it a little wiggle, get it separated, and this whole thing will come off together. Now, since we are pulling the upper intake manifold off and opening up the engine, you want to go ahead and clean out this whole area with some compressed air so we can get it nice and clean so we don't introduce no rocks or dirt or grit into the engine. Let's go ahead and pull off our coolant hose right here. It just clips into the intake. And we're just going to kind of pull that off to the side when we actually pull the intake off. We'll unclip the electrical connector right here for the purge valve and even the evap line right here for the purge valve. And that pulls right off of there. Unclip it. Now you see on here, the way this works is it'll be locked in like that on that purge valve. You squeeze it in on these two green retainers, and then you push it through. And once it's all the way out, it'll pull right off. So put that off to the side. Connector for the throttle body. Disconnect that. Okay, we're good to go there. Let's pull off our vacuum line right here on top of the throttle body. So we'll go ahead and kind of clamp that together and release the clamp. And it should slide off of there. Might be a little stuck. Get our trim tool in here, and then I get this off to the side. On top here, there's a bunch of 8mm bolts. Just start taking those out. And we're just gonna kind of jump around and de-torque it as even as possible. Let's go ahead and get the bolts out right here. Come off to the side here. Now the rest of these should be captured, a captured design. Now there is one more bolt that holds this thing on, and that is a support bracket. You see that bolt right there? Let me focus on it. There we go. That one right there, it's an 8mm. You want to take that out. We're going to leave the bracket in place. We're going to pull the bolt out, and then this thing will come up and out of the way. All right, now with that bolt out over here for the bracket, we can kind of get this stuff out of the way and lift straight up. And once you get it high enough that we're separated there, we can get some of these harnesses out of the way. There we go. And just kind of snake it up and out of the way, as you see here. Now, once it's to this point where we got it up and out of the way, you'll see there's one last connection right there for the PCV. So let's disconnect it right there. It's one of those gray quick disconnects. So let's pull that off before we break it down there. And then this whole thing will come out. So we'll do that real quick. Get that disconnected. Okay. And this whole sucker comes out of here. Now once the upper intake is off of there, you can see all our intake runners are of course exposed. So make sure you put some rags down in there, plug them up so no parts or grit or bolts get down in there and just ruin your day. So let's plug those right now. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is show you how to change one spark plug from start to finish, so you guys know exactly how to do it, follow my tips and tricks to get it done right. And then you simply follow that same procedure for the other 5 spark plugs on here. Once that intake is off, the procedure is exactly the same for each one of these, okay? They're fairly simple, again, once the intake is off on there. Now, each one of these connectors on these newer vehicles have these extra locking tabs, this red locking tab right here. So what you want to do is pull back on it all the way. See right here? It's not far enough. You need to pull it back and you'll feel it stop, and it's going to look just like that. It's going to be protruding from the connector. Then you simply push down on the release tab right here and pull back, and out of the way it goes. Now the bolt on here is an 8mm bolt. So we'll take that out. Get it off to the side so we don't lose it down in the engine. And then these coils, generally they come right off of here. You can just simply twist and pull them out, okay? Now if you find them to be sticking, what you can use is a cat claw like this. Get underneath the plastic part of it and kind of help it up. Okay, just avoid the boot on there so you don't damage it. So we'll take the coil out. Now once it's out, you want to check it for any kind of cracks or overheating issues, anything like that before going back in. So we'll inspect it now and clean it up, and then we're going to apply a little bit of dielectric grease to the very tip there for the new spark plug. Now in general, these have such a good design to them, the seal on there. Not much dirt or debris or anything gets down in these spark plug wells. But in general, whenever you're doing spark plugs, you want to clean that well out with some compressed air and give it a good visual, okay? Okay, we're good to go. Now there's one tool you want to consider buying for a job like this and any future jobs you have, and that is this special spark plug socket right here. Not only does it have a magnetic tip to it, and it's cushioned so you don't break your spark plugs coming out or going back in, but it also has a swivel built into it, and it's all one piece, so you won't lose parts of it down in the cylinder on there. So we'll put it down in there, make sure we're locked in, then we'll break torque. Okay, you may want to use a 1/2 inch like I am because it can be a little hard at first. This one wasn't so bad. The thing with these is that they have an extremely long thread on there, so they can get stuck in there pretty good. Now what you may notice is a little bit of squeaking and screeching and stuff like that. Don't worry about it. They put these plugs in dry at the factory, and they rely on the nickel plating or the plating on the plug themselves to prevent any kind of galling and like that. So they're going to be dry, okay, on the outside. And there might be some rust and stuff like that. Now once your plug is out, you want to give it a good visual. Okay, let's see if you can see that. And it should have a little bit of a whitish tint like that too, and that's from it running so darn lean. But there shouldn't be no ash buildup or carbon buildup on here, like big amounts, or oil even. You see a little bit of carbon right here, it's totally fine. So this right here is absolutely perfect. Now again, because of the possibility of debris falling into the cylinder, I always put my air nozzle in there and I clean the threads and the combustion chamber itself. And that's exactly why. All that rust was on the threads, and you don't want that going back in. So I'll go in to the combustion chamber, and then I'll come back out and swirl around the threads to really clean them out. Okay? And there's all that positive displacement of air, so anything that's in there is coming out. Now the plug that I recommend are the Motorcraft plugs, and I'll link to them down below so you guys have a good reference of the latest plugs that are out there. And the reason being is you don't want to use other plugs out there because a lot of times, I mean a lot of times, you have new problems afterwards, so it's a gamble. Okay, NGK is a pretty good brand, Autolites are okay nowadays. Any other brand I do not recommend, so I just prefer to stick with Motorcraft because I know in the end, I will not have problems going back together, especially when you got to pull that intake off. You don't want to do that over again. Now, these plugs do have a coating on them, so you don't need anti-seize on there, but as you just heard, you should really put some kind of lubrication on there, a really light amount of nickel anti-seize again. I'll link to it down below, along with the latest and greatest spark plug for these engines. All the specs will be down below also for you guys for a quick, easy reference. So put a little bit on there. Make sure it's not cracked or damaged. Make sure the gap on here is right around 51 thousandths, and then we're good to go. We can go ahead and start putting our new plug in here. This is the other nice thing about this this spark plug socket is that right there. It'll literally hold it in there so it doesn't get damaged and fall into the cylinder. So let's go ahead and put it back in. Going back in, put it in there nice and straight so we don't damage the ground strap on there, and then we're simply going to turn it in by hand. It may be a little tight like this one is at first, but that anti-seize will start working in on there. This way you cannot strip or cross thread the plug. It's impossible by hand. So this way I know I'm not going to damage the cylinder head. And some of these, if they're going in good enough, I'll put them in all the way down until they stop. You get a dead stop like that right there, and then I'll torque them down. Now the torque spec on these is 133 inch-pounds. And truly, is it needed? Well, I'll tell you the truth. I don't torque down spark plugs in general. I have a good feel for them. What I use is my trusty 3/8 ratchet. I don't have much leverage with it, and I know once it gets to that dead stop, okay, dead stop, I give it another quarter or an eighth. You'll feel it. It'll give, and then it'll just stop, and you'll have to give tremendous force after that to make it move any further. That's when you know to stop before that point, okay? So we're going right there. Right there's a dead stop. If I want it to move any more, I gotta give a lot of force. You don't wanna do that. This right here, it's in there, and it's nice and snug. You're not gonna have any issues. Let's recheck it, good to go. Boom, move on to the next one. Now the one tip I can give you is you wanna do one cylinder at a time. Open it up, pull the old plug out, clean it out real nice, put the new plug in, tighten it down really good, and then move on to the next one. You don't wanna be working over here with this spark plug out. You blow garbage out and it comes up and over and right into this cylinder, okay? So each one you do, make sure you plug it off before you go on to the next one. Now, when going back together, again, make sure your coil is nice and clean, no cracks, no damage, no signs of overheating. And then we're gonna put a little bit of the XG3A Dielectric Grease from Motorcraft. It's really good stuff. You wanna use it on your spark plugs and braking components. I use it all the time. And then you simply put it down into here, nice and straight. It'll self-center over the spark plug itself. You'll feel it. It'll go all the way down, bottom out like that. No effort, okay? And then we'll get this started by hand, a couple of threads. And I like to hold it down in place and just snug it down. Don't forget going back together to push in your connector all the way till it clicks, and then we'll lock down the red locking tab on there also, all the way. And that's it. That's all there is to changing spark plugs on these. Again, just repeat the same procedure for the other 5 cylinders, one at a time, and then we'll come back to the end here and we'll start putting the intake back on and torquing it down. Now there's one item you may want to consider replacing while the intake manifold is off, and that is the PCV valve right here. That is located on the rear bank in the valve cover, and it simply untwists right out of there, and you can swap it out in about a few seconds. The reason I'm saying that is because it does require intake removal to change it out. So we have the intake off already. If you're doing spark plugs, it's probably 60,000 miles or more. Guess what? It's time for a PCV valve too. So you simply use a pliers, you grab onto it right here, and you turn it to the left, okay? Now once you're past the locking tabs on there, you can do it by hand and pull it out. There we go. That one's pretty bad. Now the elbow on here on this particular engine is heat formed onto the PCV valve, and it does not come with the new PCV valve. So what you need to do is get it nice and soft. We can pull it off of there. I've pulled these off before by just grabbing it and working it off slowly, but it works a lot better with something like this. Heat gun. Put it on low. We'll get it nice and soft. You should be able to pull it off then. It's coming a little bit. Okay, we should be able to pull it off now. Could be hot. Oh yeah. And now, of course, it's a good time to just push it onto the new one. All right, there it is, like new. No damage at all. Now, before putting your intake back on, you want to change the gasket out on here. It is a one-piece design, so it's nice and simple. You get in here with the pick, and we'll pull up one side of it right here, and we'll pull it out, and get the old one out of here. And then we'll just go through and make sure the surface on here is nice and clean. Okay. Get anything off of here. I'll use some brake clean on a rag. Clean it up real nice. Okay. Looks pretty darn good. And then, of course, I'll use some compressed air to clean out all these channels on here, and of course the intake runners. Okay, that looks clean enough. Let's go ahead and put the gasket on. Now it does go only one way, so you'll see right here there'll be an alignment tab, and of course it does not work this way. Okay, so line that up, get it laid in there, and then you can start pushing it down. And it has these locking ribs on there that hold it in place while we're putting the intake back onto the engine. So I like to go through and make sure it's pushed down all the way, nice and seated, so it doesn't get twisted or anything weird and cause an intake leak. You don't want any problems afterwards. And we'll get this ready to go. Now I'll go over it one more time. Just make sure it's seated. At this point, the intake is ready to bolt back on. Alright, everything is back together, right and tight, clipped in, locked in. We're good to go. All the spark plugs are done. PCV valve, if you changed it, make sure that's all secure. We can go ahead and pull these rags out right here and clean off the sealing surface before you even pull the other rags out. Get all that dirt and oil off of there. Then you pull these guys out. And we'll finish cleaning the surface on here. All right. I'll do a light cleaning with air on the surface. Now I'll really clean out the cylinders and the intake ports here. All right. So everything on here looks good visually. It's nice and clean. There's nothing down the ports. Let's go ahead and plop our intake back on there. Now the only thing you have to worry about going back in with this, get it in there, okay? Don't disturb your gasket. What we're gonna do is we're gonna connect that PCV line up back here. We're gonna snap it into there. There we go. Snap back in, and now we're free to check this gasket one more time. Good to go. We can concentrate on getting it into place here. Around this harness. Kind of center it there. And there are alignment tabs, pins, built into the intake that go into the lower intake, so it'll help you align it. And then we'll just go through and we'll tighten. We'll get all these intake bolts started by hand Okay. So there's no cross threading going on here. And then I'll make sure it's all aligned. This. I like to carry a socket around, a deep ball socket, to get these back ones started. And then you even want to get your long bolt that's up top here started too. So they're all started by hand. At this point you can check, make sure everything back here at the PCV. It's good to go. Okay, we're good to go still. Our harness is going through right here between the throttle body and the intake, so we're not pinching that. Now once the intake is set into place, it's aligned, everything looks good, no pinch harnesses. We have each one of these bolts threaded by hand a little bit so they're not cross threading. Okay, we can go ahead and just snug it down to 89 inch-pounds in sequence. And I'll put the sequence down below in the video description, along with all the tools and parts that I use for this job. Now once the intake is torqued down in sequence to 89 inch-pounds, you want to go through all these bolts again in sequence and tighten them an additional 45 degrees. Now what you can do is just mark the bolt with a permanent marker and then just kind of, guess 45 degrees or so. It's not too critical for an intake, so don't fret about it. Just get it close to 45 degrees in sequence, go through all the bolts, and that'll be it. That'll be the two-step tightening sequence on here. And what that's accommodating for is the gasket itself, the squish. So it's going to accommodate for that, so it's a leak-free repair in the end. Now the easy way to keep track of that is to mark each one of the bolts right here in the center on the bottom here, okay? So you know if you manage to skip one somehow or something like that, you'll know in the end because they'll all be facing the same direction. You know you torqued them that additional 45 degrees, okay? So again, in sequence, so we can look at this one right here. We know where 90 degrees is at, it's a right angle to it, so you just put it right about there, and you just go. Like I said, it's not a huge issue. Okay, you can even do 50 degrees. It's not going to be a major issue. Just do it in sequence and make sure you don't miss any of them. So let's go ahead and start putting our connections back on. All our electrical connections, stuff like that. Just clip each one of them in until they click. You know they're locked in and good to go. Turn these around. We'll lock in our coolant hose. Bring this one over and around. Stick it back in there all the way. And we'll lock it. Give it a little tug, it should not come off. And then of course secure it right here. Snap back in. Good to go, good to go. Everything looks right, locked in. And then of course, don't forget your vacuum line over here for your booster. Go ahead and get that out of there. Okay, we'll get this clamp on here. Okay, let's snap our fresh air inlet tube on for the PCV system. Locked in, good to go. We'll swing it out of the way for right now. And we can go ahead and start getting that air intake snorkel back on. Now before we put this air intake snorkel back on, we need to put this bolt back in for that bracket underneath the throttle body we took out earlier. Kind of get in here and feel for it. And you'll be able to see it right through the top here too, to help align it. All right, that's back in. So at this point, the entire intake is back on and together. Bracket bolts are in, lines are back connected together. We can go ahead and put our air intake snorkel back on. All right, so we'll go ahead and put this back on. Make sure your 3 ribs right here lock into the box, the lower box. So kind of hook it into there. And it'll fall down into place. Get past all this. Fully locked in. Get your locking tabs. Come over here. Get it fully pushed onto the throttle body. And we'll hold it in place and tighten it. Okay. Don't forget your connection right here for the aspirator. Push it on. And then, of course, our fresh air inlet right here. It's fully locked on. This is good to go. Locked in over here. Over here. The last thing is your mass airflow sensor connector right here. Clip it in. Lock it in. Put a retainer here. Everything should be good to go at this point. Now once you have the intake back on, everything's back together, it looks right and tight, you want to go over it one more time, make sure we didn't miss any connections before starting the vehicle. Once you start the vehicle up, leave that appearance cover off of here. You want to come over and get a good visual, and you want to listen, you want to make sure it's not shaking or anything weird like that before putting that appearance cover back on. There's a lot of different small items we could have missed, and you want to make sure it's right before you close the hood on this vehicle. Now, if you like this video, be sure to hit like and subscribe down below, and I'll see you next time.